In this video, we dive into the most horrific TV moments ever recorded, from a live escape stunt pushed beyond its time limit inside a sealed setup to a TV professional refusing to stop a dangerous on-air demonstration in the worst way possible. It was 1992 in Manchester, England, when Bobby Davro, a well-known comedian and TV personality, was filming the final scene of his show, Public Enemy No. 1. Bobby was popular for his high-energy performances, and physical fitness was a big part of his life. His father, Bill Nankivell, was once an Olympic runner, and Bobby stayed active through his work. At 34, Bobby had built his career on fearless physical comedy that often pushed the boundaries of safety. His willingness to endure pain for laughs had made him a household name across Britain, with audiences tuning in specifically to watch him throw himself into increasingly elaborate stunts. The Manchester studio had become his second home over the past 3 years, and the crew had grown accustomed to Bobby's relentless perfectionism and his insistence on performing every stunt himself rather than using body doubles. Bobby's athletic background gave him confidence in physical challenges that would intimidate other performers. He had trained in gymnastics as a teenager and maintained his flexibility through daily workouts, believing that his conditioning would protect him from serious injury. His colleagues often marveled at his ability to bounce back from minor bumps and bruises that would sideline other entertainers for days. This particular filming day had proceeded smoothly, with Bobby completing several demanding sequences without complaint or hesitation. The scene they were filming was meant to be lighthearted. Bobby was locked into a wooden stocks prop, his head and hands sticking through the holes, while his fellow entertainers Keith Chegwin, Lionel Blair, and Jim Bowen threw tomatoes at him. It was supposed to be harmless fun, the kind of physical comedy that Bobby was known for. But the prop wasn't secure, and Bobby had to balance himself on a box because the floor beneath him was hard concrete. The setup seemed routine, just another day of filming comedy sketches with his colleagues. Bobby had performed countless physical stunts throughout his career without incident, and this particular scene was supposed to be one of the easier ones. The wooden stocks were meant to hold him in place while his friends pelted him with tomatoes for laughs, creating the kind of slapstick humor that audiences loved. Suddenly, Bobby lost his balance. With his arms trapped in the wooden restraints, he couldn't stop himself from falling. He hit the ground face first, and Keith Chegwin later said the sound of Bobby's head hitting the concrete was one of the worst he'd ever heard. Thankfully, Bobby managed to turn his head slightly mid-fall, which likely protected him from even worse injuries, but he still cut his chin open and briefly lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were surprised to find that he hadn't broken his nose or lost any teeth. However, he suffered a neck injury from the impact and was diagnosed with whiplash. He was told to rest, but although filming had finished, the pain in his neck continued and spread to other areas of his body. Bobby later visited an osteopath who used physical therapy to ease his symptoms. Recovery took about 6 weeks, and he eventually regained movement, but the pain never fully went away. For a while, he couldn't even do basic exercises like sit-ups, and even years later, Bobby still deals with pain in his neck and upper back. Long car rides are difficult, and sometimes he experiences arm pain and headaches caused by nerve pressure. The fall was never aired, but the BBC now uses the clip for training purposes to show how fast accidents can happen, even in a controlled setting. Bobby never received compensation for what happened, as at the time, it wasn't common to file injury claims like it is today. It was November 7, 2017, and Midtown Manhattan buzzed with energy around ABC Studios as pedestrians hurried past the glass building housing Morning Conversations with Diana Ross. The popular daytime talk show had built its reputation tackling social issues with supposed sensitivity. Jennifer Walsh sat in the green room, nervously adjusting her modest blue dress. At 38, the former marketing executive had agreed to discuss her journey through addiction and recovery. Her 8 months of sobriety represented the longest clean time she'd achieved in over a decade of prescription drug addiction that had cost her career, marriage, and nearly her life. 3 weeks earlier, Jennifer responded to a casting call seeking people willing to share recovery stories. Producers assured her the interview would focus on hope and redemption rather than addiction's darkest moments. Jennifer's recovery had been supported by her sister Michelle, who sat in the studio audience despite anxiety about public exposure. The women had rebuilt their relationship over the past year, with Michelle serving as Jennifer's primary support system during early sobriety's most challenging phases. Jennifer had spent 90 days at Serenity Springs Recovery Center in upstate New York, learning coping strategies. Her counselor had been hesitant about the television appearance, concerned that stress might trigger relapse during such a vulnerable recovery period. The interview began promisingly as Diana asked gentle questions about Jennifer's background and circumstances leading to addiction. Jennifer spoke eloquently about prescription painkillers prescribed after a car accident, describing how tolerance grew and life gradually spiraled out of control. Then Diana's questioning shifted toward sensational territory. Without warning, she produced a folder containing details about Jennifer's arrests, financial problems, and family conflicts not discussed during pre-interview preparation. Jennifer's face flushed with embarrassment as private details were revealed without consent. "Let's talk about the time you stole from your own mother's purse to buy drugs," Diana said, her tone becoming aggressive. "How does someone sink that low?" The question hit Jennifer like a physical blow, bringing back shame she'd worked so hard to overcome. Her breathing became rapid and shallow as studio lights seemed to grow oppressive. Jennifer tried maintaining composure, but Diana continued pressing for salacious details. "What about when you were found unconscious in that hotel room?" The host's questions became increasingly invasive, focusing on traumatic aspects rather than recovery. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably as Jennifer began showing obvious distress. Her hands trembled as she gripped her chair arms, voice becoming shaky. Michelle watched with growing alarm, recognizing signs of her sister's anxiety attacks. "I think we should focus on recovery's positive aspects," Jennifer managed to whisper, but Diana pressed on relentlessly, producing photographs from Jennifer's arrest records. Jennifer's breathing became increasingly labored as she felt trapped under studio lights. Familiar feelings of shame and worthlessness flooded back with overwhelming intensity. "Please, I need to stop," she whispered, but cameras continued rolling. Suddenly, Jennifer began hyperventilating, her chest rising and falling rapidly as panic consumed her. She stood from her chair, looking desperately toward the exit. "I can't breathe," she gasped, clutching her chest as her heart rate skyrocketed. The audience watched in horror as Jennifer collapsed back into her chair, face pale and eyes wide with terror. Michelle rushed toward the stage, but security blocked her path. Jennifer's body began convulsing as extreme stress triggered a cardiac event. Studio medics reached Jennifer within 60 seconds, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Jennifer Walsh was pronounced dead at Mount Sinai Hospital at 2:47 p.m. from stress-induced cardiac arrest. The show faced immediate backlash from viewers and addiction specialists. Sponsors withdrew support within hours. It was January 19, 2018, when 33-year-old field reporter Jared Fulton arrived at what would become his final assignment. With 9 years of experience covering severe weather events across the Midwest, Jared had built a reputation as one of the most thorough and safety-conscious reporters in the region. His colleagues respected his meticulous preparation and professional approach to dangerous weather coverage. But on this frigid Oklahoma evening, even his careful nature couldn't protect him from a tragic miscommunication. The assignment was covering a historic ice storm that had left widespread power outages and created hazardous conditions throughout the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. Ice accumulation had reached unprecedented levels, with some areas reporting over 3 inches of ice coating on trees, power lines, and roadways. The freezing rain had also disabled several cellular towers, forcing emergency crews to rely on spotty radio communication and handwritten reports. The storm had battered the region for 2 days, turning it into a landscape as beautiful as it was deadly. Jared had positioned himself in a residential neighborhood to document the ice accumulation and interview residents who were coping with extended power outages in sub-freezing temperatures. The location seemed ideal. It offered dramatic visuals of ice-laden trees and allowed him to showcase the storm's impact on ordinary families. What he didn't know was that utility records for the area were incomplete due to storm-related communication failures between repair crews. Utility crews had been working around the clock to restore power, battling ice accumulation and the continuous threat of falling tree branches weighted down with ice. Power lines that crews believed had been de-energized were sometimes still carrying dangerous electrical current due to incomplete documentation during the chaotic restoration efforts. As evening approached, Jared began setting up for his live broadcast near what appeared to be a safe location away from major power lines. The scene around him was both beautiful and ominous, trees bent under the weight of ice, creating a crystalline landscape that sparkled under the streetlights. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Jared began his live evening broadcast, standing near the ice-covered trees to demonstrate the storm's dramatic impact on the residential area. His report was informative and compelling, showing viewers the real challenges that residents face during extended power outages in dangerous winter conditions. He described the beauty and danger of the ice accumulation while maintaining his professional demeanor. The catastrophic failure happened without warning. The oak tree branch, no longer able to support the massive weight of accumulated ice, cracked completely and began falling toward the ground. The branch struck a power line that utility crews had incorrectly believed was disconnected from the electrical grid. The line was still energized by a nearby substation after automatic grid rerouting minutes earlier. The impact caused the power line to snap and fall directly onto Jared, who was standing 8 feet away and had no time to react. The 13,200-volt electrical current caused immediate cardiac arrest as it entered his body through his shoulder and exited through his leg. Witnesses saw a brilliant blue-white arc flash as the wire contacted his shoulder, momentarily illuminating the ice-covered scene. The electrical shock killed him instantly. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes, but found that death had been instantaneous. The live broadcast captured the entire incident before the camera operator shut down the equipment. Jared was pronounced dead at the scene from electrical cardiac arrest. It was March 8, 2016 in Portland, Oregon, as a packed high school gym hosted a state semifinal basketball game broadcast live on a regional cable sports channel. The gymnasium had reached standing room capacity, with spectators lining railings along the upper concourse. The game had drawn unusual attention after the team's unexpected playoff run, prompting a live broadcast using fixed elevated cameras mounted above the court and along the upper seating area. The setup was standard for regional sports coverage, providing wide angles rather than handheld sideline footage. David Williams, 39, was the team's head coach and had remained active throughout the game, pacing the sideline and frequently scanning the upper levels during timeouts. The gym featured a narrow mezzanine walkway behind the upper bleachers, originally designed for lighting access and banner maintenance. Though not intended for routine foot traffic during events, it had become an informal observation point over the years. Months earlier, a routine facilities report had flagged the mezzanine's guardrail anchors as loose due to vibration damage and age-related metal fatigue. Temporary brackets were installed, and permanent repairs were deferred until after basketball season to avoid closing the gym during playoffs. The area was not barricaded that evening. Late in the fourth quarter, the team trailed by 2 points. During a timeout, Williams stepped away from the bench and moved up the stairwell toward the mezzanine, seeking a higher angle to assess defensive spacing. The live broadcast remained focused on the court, but the elevated wide camera captured portions of the upper concourse in the background. As play resumed, Williams leaned forward against the mezzanine railing, resting his forearms on the metal bar while watching the floor below. Structural analysis later showed that one of the temporary brackets had loosened further under repeated vibration from crowd movement. When Williams shifted his weight, the railing anchor failed. On the live feed, viewers saw a sudden movement at the edge of the frame as the railing gave way. Williams disappeared from view, followed by a brief, audible impact off-camera. The broadcast did not show the fall itself, but the reaction on the court was immediate. Players froze, referees stopped play, and spectators nearest the mezzanine began shouting and pointing upward. Arena staff and officials moved quickly to block off the concourse, urging nearby spectators back as others tried to rush toward the mezzanine area. The production team cut quickly to a static wide shot of the court, then to commercial programming. However, the interruption occurred seconds after the incident, and viewers watching live witnessed the exact moment play stopped and the crowd's reaction to an unseen emergency. Emergency medical personnel stationed on site reached Williams within moments, followed by city responders. He was found unresponsive on the concourse level below the mezzanine. Despite rapid medical intervention, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental, caused by catastrophic head and internal injuries sustained in the fall. Investigators confirmed the railing failure was due to compromised anchoring and deferred structural repairs. Officials cleared the court as spectators along the upper concourse reacted to an emergency just out of frame, and the feed cut away without immediate explanation. The school district closed the gymnasium immediately and ordered inspections of all elevated walkways across its facilities. Regulators cited deferred maintenance and improper use of temporary structural supports. It was August 19, 2016, and the late afternoon heat pressed down on the county fairgrounds in southwestern Arizona. The rodeo arena sat under a cloudless sky, with temperatures hovering near 98 degrees. Dust hung in the still air as vendors prepared for the evening's main event. Bowen Fisk, a 35-year-old weekend sports correspondent for a regional television station, arrived early to set up for his live broadcast. Standing just over 6 feet tall with graying temples, Bowen had covered rodeos for nearly a decade. His background as an amateur bull rider gave him a comfort level around livestock that most reporters lacked. The assignment was straightforward: deliver a live introduction from inside the arena before the evening's competition began. Bowen positioned himself near the bucking chutes, where a massive Brahma bull waited in the steel enclosure. The animal weighed approximately 1,800 pounds and showed signs of agitation, shifting its weight and snorting as handlers prepared the rigging. Arena maintenance had been delayed that afternoon due to equipment issues. The gate latch on the chute showed visible stress marks and slight bending from previous use. Standard protocol required a secondary safety lock, but in the rush to prepare for the broadcast, this backup measure remained disengaged. Bowen stood roughly 6 feet from the chute gate, well within what he considered a safe distance. As the live feed began, Bowen started his introduction, gesturing toward the chutes behind him. The cameraman had positioned himself at ground level approximately 20 feet away, framing a medium shot with the chutes visible in the background. The bull continued to shift restlessly, pressing against the gate with increasing force. The primary latch, already compromised from wear, began to give way. Metal groaned softly under the strain. Without warning, the latch failed completely. The gate swung open with violent force, and the bull burst blindly out of the chute, veering across the arena as it tried to escape the enclosure. Bowen had no time to react as the animal's momentum carried it into his position. The bull's massive shoulder and head collided with Bowen's upper body, knocking him violently backward onto the hard-packed arena floor. His head struck the ground as the animal's weight followed him down. The bull stumbled over him in the momentum of its escape, driving a hoof into his chest before veering away toward the open arena. Bowen lay motionless where he had fallen as handlers rushed to regain control of the animal. The entire attack lasted approximately 4 seconds. Arena personnel immediately moved to contain the bull, while others rushed toward Bowen. The cameraman had captured the initial moments before instinctively lowering his equipment. Emergency medical personnel reached him within 90 seconds, but the injuries were catastrophic. Bowen was unconscious and unresponsive, with severe head trauma from the fall and crushing chest injuries from the trampling. He showed no detectable vital signs. He was pronounced dead at the scene from blunt force trauma and crushing injuries sustained in the collision. The subsequent investigation confirmed that the gate latch had failed due to metal fatigue and improper maintenance. The report noted the absence of the required secondary locking mechanism and cited inadequate safety protocols for media personnel. The live television feed captured the moment the bull struck Bowen and knocked him to the ground before the control room abruptly cut away. The footage showed Bowen being struck and knocked to the ground, but the camera angle shifted as the cameraman reacted to the unfolding tragedy. Fair officials immediately suspended all rodeo events pending a comprehensive safety review. It was August 17, 2013, in Miami, Florida. A live morning television segment was underway in the outdoor parking area of a regional broadcast studio, where a heat endurance stunt had been set up for continuous on-air coverage. A transparent, custom-built sauna enclosure stood on a raised platform, surrounded by cameras, lighting stands, and monitoring screens displaying internal temperature and elapsed time. Rebecca Martinez, 29, was the program's co-host and a regular participant in challenge-based segments designed to boost ratings and viewer engagement. She had built a reputation for completing physically demanding stunts on air, including endurance dances and food challenges. For this broadcast, she proposed an extended sauna endurance attempt tied to a charity fundraiser and an unofficial record benchmark. Production planning documents describe the segment as high-risk but manageable with medical standby, hydration supply, and continuous visual monitoring. The enclosure was a modified heat chamber, built with thick, transparent polycarbonate panels and a framed door fitted with an outward-opening latch and magnetic seal. Portable heaters and steam units were positioned outside the chamber and vented inward through heat-rated ducts. A digital sensor array displayed air temperature and humidity on a broadcast overlay. Target temperature was set between 165 to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, within the upper operating range of commercial saunas, but higher than typical televised demonstrations. On-site medics were assigned to observe for heat illness indicators and were authorized to recommend termination if preset thresholds were crossed. Rebecca entered the chamber shortly after 9 a.m., wearing light athletic clothing and a biometric wrist monitor. Water bottles and electrolyte drinks were placed inside within reach. During the first 90 minutes, she remained alert and responsive, periodically signaling status to the crew through hand gestures and brief microphone responses. Internal readings showed stable temperature but rising humidity, as steam output accumulated faster than expected under the sealed configuration. Later review found the chamber's ventilation slot had been partially obstructed by a camera cable repositioned for a tighter shot. As the second hour passed, Rebecca's movement slowed and her posture changed from upright to seated against the rear panel. According to the medic log, her gestures became less consistent and response delays increased. These signs were initially attributed to normal fatigue under heat exposure. The stunt clock remained active because her biometric readings, though elevated, had not yet crossed the automatic abort threshold set during pre-show planning. Near the 2-hour mark, Rebecca attempted to stand and lost balance. The live camera feed showed uncoordinated movement followed by collapse onto the chamber floor. The supervisor ordered an immediate stop. When crew attempted to open the door, the magnetic seal did not release on the first trigger. Heat expansion along the frame increased seal pressure, requiring a manual override pull from the hinge side. Entry was gained after several seconds, and medics removed her from the chamber and began active cooling procedures on site before transport. Martinez was pronounced dead at the hospital later that day. The medical report listed exertional heat stroke with multi-organ complications as the cause of death. The post-incident review cited contributing factors including elevated humidity from restricted ventilation, abort thresholds set too high for a sealed environment, and a door seal design that did not account for thermal expansion under sustained peak heat. Broadcast safety guidance issued afterward required redundant ventilation clearance checks, lower automatic abort limits, and non-magnetic quick-release door hardware for all live heat endurance segments. It was 1979 in Clearwater, Florida, when a new Christian-themed kids show called Joy Junction aired on the Christian television network. It featured colorful characters like Sheriff Dawn, Professor Cloudhopper, Whistler Dan, and a ventriloquist named Ron, who performed with his puppet Marty. The show focused on fun and faith, teaching kids about values, kindness, and staying away from bad influences. Ronald William Brown, the man behind the Ron character, was also active in his local Largo, Florida church community. He regularly hosted puppet shows, gave kids rides to church in the church van, and even invited them over for pizza before Bible study. To many parents, he seemed kind and trustworthy, exactly the type of person they wanted influencing their children. The show quickly became popular, with parents loving its wholesome message and kids enjoying the songs, games, and lessons. Soon, Joy Junction expanded nationally, airing on major Christian networks like Trinity Broadcasting and Family Network. It ran for nearly 20 years, from 1979 into the early 2000s, reaching thousands of homes across America. Brown used his platform to teach children about resisting temptation and staying on the right path, all while hiding something much darker behind his wholesome image. In 1998, police stopped Brown and found children's underwear in his vehicle. He claimed they were props for his puppets, and authorities let him go with no further action taken. Years passed without incident until 2012, when investigators looking into an online network involved in disturbing activities came across a man from Kansas named Michael Arnett. When they searched his computer, they found highly inappropriate images involving children, some posed in staged settings. But what really stood out were the chat logs. Arnett had been exchanging messages with a man in Florida, and that man was Ronald Brown. The two had been talking for months on a hidden forum, their conversations going beyond possession of inappropriate content to include detailed and graphic discussions involving children. Brown referenced a boy he knew personally from church, speaking of deeply troubling intentions and sharing diagrams and pictures he had secretly taken of the child. On July 19, 2012, authorities raided Brown's home in Largo. What they found was deeply alarming. Thousands of illegal files, some involving deceased children, along with written plans, drawings, and content dating back to 1978, a year before Joy Junction began. Brown was arrested and charged with possession and intent to commit serious harm against a minor. He admitted to the chats but claimed it was all fantasy and that he never planned to act on it. The court didn't believe him, and he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, essentially a life sentence given his age and health. In 2020, Brown died in prison at the age of 65 due to complications from a neurological illness. After his arrest, everything connected to Joy Junction went silent. Networks removed all traces of the show with no statements or press releases, and even cast members distanced themselves. For a long time, the show became lost media, with only a few clips surviving, mainly from old VHS tapes uploaded to YouTube. Ronald Brown wasn't just a performer, he was trusted by parents, surrounded by children, and active in the community, which makes this case so disturbing. It was June 3, 2013, and afternoon sun cast warm light through the Culinary Network's Chicago studios, as familiar sounds of food preparation filled Studio B. The professional kitchen gleamed under television lights, creating the perfect backdrop for Cooking with Passion, one of the network's most popular live cooking shows. Chef Antonio Rossi reviewed his recipe cards as he arranged ingredients on the marble countertop that had become his signature workspace. At 52, the charismatic Italian chef had built a television empire around his passionate cooking style, and authentic family recipes passed down through 4 generations. His thick accent and animated gestures had made him beloved among home cooks, and his cookbook, Nonna's Kitchen, had spent 18 weeks on bestseller lists. Today's featured recipe was osso buco alla Milanese, a traditional braised veal dish Antonio learned from his grandmother in Milan. He'd immigrated to Chicago 25 years earlier, with nothing but culinary skills and unshakable belief in authentic Italian cuisine. His restaurant, Rossi's, had become a Chicago institution, but television brought his passion to millions nationwide. Antonio's wife, Maria, and teenage sons Marco and Giuseppe watched from the studio audience. They'd grown accustomed to their father's theatrical cooking style but never tired of watching him transform simple ingredients into masterpieces while sharing stories of their Italian heritage. Today featured a flambe demonstration, a technique Antonio had perfected in high-end restaurants. The dramatic flames and theatrical presentation had become his signature move, always generating excitement. As the live broadcast began, Antonio's enthusiasm was immediately evident. He welcomed viewers with characteristic warmth, beginning osso buco preparation with practiced precision while sharing memories of cooking with his grandmother. The audience laughed at his animated descriptions of family dinner arguments and his grandmother's strict kitchen rules. The demonstration proceeded flawlessly through 45 minutes as Antonio braised veal shanks and prepared traditional gremolata garnish. His knife skills impressed as he minced garlic and chopped parsley with restaurant-quality precision. As the show neared conclusion, Antonio prepared for the flambe finale. He heated brandy while explaining the technique's science. "The alcohol must be perfect temperature," he said, eyes twinkling. "Too cool and nothing happens. Too hot and you lose control." Antonio's loose-fitting chef's coat, a trademark element, billowed as he moved around the set. The cotton fabric had been starched for crisp appearance under hot lights, making it more flammable than standard kitchen attire. As he reached across the stovetop to adjust pan position, his right sleeve passed directly over the open gas flame. The fabric ignited instantly, sending bright orange flame racing up Antonio's arm toward his shoulder. His initial reaction was patting flames with his left hand, but this only spread fire to his other sleeve. Panic set in as he realized the severity, his movements becoming erratic as he tried extinguishing growing flames, while millions watched in horror. In desperation, Antonio knocked over heated olive oil. The oil spilled across the stovetop and ignited immediately, creating a wall of flames blocking his path to the emergency shower. The sprinkler system activated within 30 seconds, but water pressure was insufficient to control the rapidly spreading grease fire. Crew members rushed on set with extinguishers, but Antonio had already suffered severe burns to his arms, chest, and face. Synthetic materials in his chef's hat had melted against his scalp, and he'd inhaled superheated air and toxic fumes. Antonio was transported to Chicago Memorial Hospital's burn unit, where he succumbed 72 hours later from complications related to severe burns covering 60% of his body and smoke inhalation damage. The show was immediately canceled, and the Culinary Network faced intense scrutiny over kitchen safety protocols. It was December 12, 2017, when 26-year-old field reporter Caroline Mercer made the choice that would define her final broadcast. With 4 years of experience covering natural disasters throughout Southern California, Caroline had built a reputation as a dedicated journalist who never backed down from dangerous assignments. Her colleagues admired her unwavering commitment to telling important stories. But on this windy December afternoon in Southern California's foothills, that fearless dedication would prove fatal. The assignment was covering mandatory evacuations in a mountain community threatened by a rapidly spreading wildfire that had already consumed 12,000 acres of drought-stricken terrain. The fire was being driven by powerful Santa Ana winds that were pushing the flames toward residential areas with unprecedented speed and intensity. Had positioned herself at a residential evacuation checkpoint to interview fleeing residents and document the emergency response efforts. The checkpoint was strategically located on a mountain road that served as the primary escape route for hundreds of families whose homes lay directly in the fire's projected path. Her news van was equipped with emergency communication equipment, but the mountainous terrain had been causing intermittent radio contact. Fire officials had been warning all media personnel that shifting wind patterns could change the fire's direction rapidly and without warning. The Santa Ana winds were notorious for their unpredictability, capable of turning a controlled situation into a life-threatening emergency within minutes. Despite these warnings, Caroline insisted on remaining in the area to provide comprehensive coverage. As the afternoon progressed, Caroline conducted interviews with evacuating families, capturing their fear and determination as they fled their homes. Her reporting was compelling and human, showing viewers the real impact of natural disasters. The evacuation checkpoint buzzed with activity as emergency vehicles guided residents to safety. The wind patterns that had been stable throughout the morning began shifting dramatically. What had been a predictable fire suddenly became an unpredictable monster, driven by 45-mile-per-hour Santa Ana winds. The fire's advancement speed increased from 1 mile per hour to a terrifying 3 miles per hour, with flames reaching heights of 40 feet and temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire officials immediately announced that all personnel needed to evacuate the checkpoint area, as the wind shift had put the location directly in the fire's new path. Caroline received the evacuation order, but chose to continue broadcasting as she moved toward her news van, hoping to capture footage of the approaching fire front. The superheated air ahead of the flames created an environment that was lethal even before the fire itself arrived. Temperatures soared above survivable levels, while toxic smoke filled the air, making breathing impossible. Caroline suffered severe smoke inhalation as the oxygen was consumed by the approaching inferno, followed by third-degree burns over 85% of her body as the fire engulfed her position. The intense fire conditions prevented emergency responders from reaching her location for 47 minutes. When firefighters finally found her, Caroline had succumbed to smoke inhalation and thermal injuries. It was November 12th, 2013 in Burlington, Vermont, as a sold-out audience filled a small community theater for the opening night of a production scheduled to be broadcast live on a local public access channel. The theater seated just 150 people, with a fixed camera mounted at the rear of the auditorium to capture a wide view of the stage. The broadcast was simple and unedited, intended to showcase local arts programming rather than provide polished coverage. Above the stage, a counterweight rigging system installed in the early 1980s supported several suspended set pieces, including a heavy canvas backdrop attached to a steel batten pipe. The rigging system had shown signs of wear for years. The backdrop used for the production had a history of drifting off alignment during rehearsals, occasionally requiring manual correction. A full replacement of the system had been discussed but postponed until the following year due to cost. In the meantime, the production moved forward with the existing equipment. Jonathan Mitchell, 52, served as the production's director and technical supervisor. Throughout the evening, he remained in the wings, monitoring scene transitions and the position of the backdrop. During the first half of the performance, the canvas shifted slightly off-center, but did not interrupt the action. The issue became more noticeable as the play approached its final act, where the backdrop framed a key scene. During the brief transition before the last act, Mitchell stepped onto the stage to make a final adjustment. The audience remained seated, and the camera continued rolling on the closed curtain and exposed stage area. Mitchell reached upward, grasping the lower edge of the batten pipe to pull the backdrop back into position. As he applied pressure, the rigging cable supporting the pipe failed at a visibly worn section. The steel batten dropped suddenly, bringing the attached canvas down with it. The falling assembly struck Mitchell across the upper body and shoulders, driving him hard onto the stage floor beneath the weight. From the wide camera angle, viewers saw the backdrop collapse and Mitchell disappear beneath it. The sound of the impact carried through the auditorium as the audience reacted instinctively, some rising from their seats as others froze in place. Actors waiting in the wings rushed forward, and several crew members moved to lift the fallen pipe and canvas. The broadcast continued for several seconds, showing the confusion on stage, before the image cut abruptly to a static slate and then went dark. Emergency services were called immediately. Crew members managed to raise the batten and clear the canvas, but Mitchell was unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began treatment on the stage before transporting him to a nearby hospital. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner later ruled the death accidental, citing blunt force trauma and cervical injuries caused by impact from a falling rigid object. A subsequent inspection confirmed that the rigging failure originated at a section of cable that had been visibly frayed and under repeated load stress. The theater was closed indefinitely following the incident, and the remainder of the production was canceled. Local inspectors conducted a full review of the facility's overhead systems, identifying multiple safety deficiencies related to aging rigging equipment. It was February 3, 2017, when a winter storm began building strength along the northeastern coastline. The city's skyline disappeared behind sheets of driving snow as temperatures plummeted below freezing. Ice formed rapidly on exposed surfaces, creating treacherous conditions across the metropolitan area. Wind gusts reached 35 miles per hour, turning the already dangerous storm into a significant weather event that demanded immediate coverage. Lyra Gant, a 31-year-old weekend weather presenter, had transitioned into broadcast journalism after spending several years as a high school science teacher. Her methodical approach to explaining complex weather patterns made her popular with viewers, though she remained relatively new to live outdoor reporting. Known for her thorough preparation and calm demeanor under pressure, she had quickly earned respect among colleagues despite her limited field experience. The station assigned her to provide visual storm coverage from a 14-story rooftop downtown, chosen specifically for its unobstructed view of the approaching weather system. The building's rooftop presented immediate challenges that morning. Ice patches had formed near the concrete parapet during the overnight hours, creating slick surfaces that reflected the gray morning light. The crew fastened Lyra's safety harness to what appeared to be a secure rooftop anchor point, but the mounting had deteriorated over time without proper inspection. Her regular footwear lacked specialized traction aids, a detail that seemed minor given the rushed nature of the assignment. The building's maintenance staff had not applied ice-melting compounds to the rooftop surface. Weather conditions deteriorated faster than meteorologists had predicted. What began as steady snowfall quickly intensified, pushing toward whiteout conditions. Visibility dropped significantly as the storm's core approached the metropolitan area. The camera operator positioned the equipment for a wide shot that would capture both Lyra and the dramatic storm backdrop, maintaining a fixed angle throughout the broadcast segment. As Lyra delivered her weather update, she stepped backward to gesture toward the approaching storm front, her movement still framed in the live shot as the camera held its wide angle. Her boot made contact with a patch of black ice that had formed along the rooftop's edge. The smooth sole found no purchase on the frozen surface. Simultaneously, a powerful gust of wind struck the exposed rooftop, creating additional instability as she fought to regain her footing. Her body went over the parapet backward. The safety harness snapped tight, loading the corroded anchor bolt with sudden force. The mounting plate tore partially out of the concrete before ripping free completely. The 14-story fall took approximately 3 seconds. Her body struck a fabric awning over a restaurant entrance partway down, tearing it instantly from its brackets before continuing uninterrupted to the concrete sidewalk below, where she impacted headfirst. Pedestrians on the street below scattered immediately after witnessing the fall. Emergency responders arrived within 6 minutes of the initial call, but the massive trauma from the impact had caused instantaneous death. The medical examiner later confirmed catastrophic cranial and thoracic injuries consistent with a fall from that height. The investigation revealed that the rooftop anchor point had failed its last inspection, but had not been replaced. Building management confirmed that ice conditions had not been assessed prior to the broadcast setup. The station immediately suspended all rooftop weather coverage, pending a comprehensive safety review. Federal workplace safety investigators cited multiple protocol violations in their final report, including inadequate equipment inspection procedures and failure to properly assess weather conditions before proceeding. The live broadcast briefly captured Lyra slipping and disappearing backward from the frame before the control room abruptly cut the feed. Storm coverage ended without explanation, leaving viewers unaware of what had occurred until official statements were released hours later. It was October 31st, 2016, in a coastal town in Massachusetts. A live Halloween broadcast was underway inside a restored 17th century house museum that operated as a seasonal tourist site. The program was produced by a local access television station using portable lighting, handheld cameras, and temporary cabling. The special featured a real-time paranormal-themed walkthrough designed to hold a continuous live feed as the host moved through different rooms of the building. Derek Sullivan, 34, was the on-air host of the special. He had spent years in local theater before moving into small-market television, where he became known for hosting holiday and event programming. His style leaned heavily on atmosphere and improvisation, rather than technical production. The Halloween episode was his most ambitious live project, built around an overnight investigation format with rotating guests and staged lighting effects. Station records described the production as low budget, with most equipment supplied by volunteers and short-term rentals rather than permanent studio gear. Preparation for the broadcast included a basic site walkthrough and limited safety review. The building's electrical system had been partially modernized, but several lower-level circuits remained tied to older wiring runs. Maintenance logs noted prior moisture intrusion after heavy rain earlier that month, especially in storage areas below ground level. Some outlets and junction points had been tagged for future repair, and at least one basement circuit cover plate was listed as missing, with a temporary barrier recommended until replacement. The television crew routed extension lines for lights and cameras through a rear access corridor and into the basement to reduce cable visibility on the main floors. The live program began shortly after 9 p.m. Derek moved room to room with a shoulder-mounted camera operator, while portable lights created high-contrast shadows for effect. Viewers watched as he demonstrated temperature meters and handheld sensors, while describing reported disturbances tied to the building's history. Minor lighting fluctuations occurred during the first hour, consistent with load changes from temporary production equipment. According to the later incident report, additional fixtures had been connected to an already stressed circuit shortly before the basement segment. Midway through the broadcast, Derek led the crew into the lower level, which was normally closed to the public and used for storage. The space had exposed beams, surface wiring, and a wall-mounted electrical panel with adjacent junction boxes. While attempting to darken and relight sections of the basement for visual effect, Derek reached toward what he believed was a lighting control switch near the panel. Instead, his hand contacted an uncovered metal junction box containing a live conductor splice tied to a temporary lighting tap. The contact created a direct fault path through his hand and forearm. Video showed an immediate muscular lock response followed by collapse. The camera remained live for several seconds as the operator stepped back, and the frame dropped toward the floor. The control room cut the feed once the loss of responsiveness was recognized. Crew members on site disconnected power at the main breaker and began first aid within minutes. Emergency services arrived shortly afterward and continued resuscitation attempts. Derek Sullivan was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical finding listed fatal electrical shock as the cause of death. The post-incident inspection documented multiple electrical hazards in the lower level, including an uncovered junction box containing a twisted conductor splice used for a temporary lighting tap, moisture exposure, overloaded temporary lighting circuits, and the absence of ground fault protection on the affected line. Local broadcast guidelines were later updated to require certified electrical clearance, restricted area barriers, and licensed electricians on site for all live remote productions in older structures. It was sometime in 2003 during an episode of Consejo de Mujeres, a Mexican daytime talk show aimed at women. The program typically covered topics like lifestyle, health, and beauty, and occasionally featured live animals for educational segments. On this particular day, 2 animal handlers from a local zoo were invited to introduce a young lion cub as part of a segment about wildlife conservation. The handlers were seated with the lion between them, and nearby, a mother sat holding her young daughter, who was calmly enjoying a lollipop while looking around the studio. Everything seemed fine. Despite being a cub, the lion was already large and powerful, sitting on a leash and appearing relaxed. The handlers and show hosts were calm, and the mother and her daughter showed no sign of fear. No safety barriers or protective measures were in place between the lion and the studio audience. But then something unexpected happened. The little girl let out a soft whimper, and the high-pitched sound caught the lion's attention. It stood up and stared directly at her. The handlers quickly tried to get it to settle down, and it obeyed for a moment. Then the child began to cry louder, and without warning, the lion lunged. It grabbed the girl's legs with its front paws and bit down. The studio filled with screams as the mother stood up and tried to pull her daughter close, but the lion didn't let go. It pulled back, its grip unshaken. The handlers rushed in, one trying to pry open the lion's mouth, the other holding the animal's body. The child kept screaming as her mother clutched her tightly. The trainers, speaking rapidly in Spanish, repeated instructions like, "Stay calm and don't move," as they tried to control the situation. It took several moments before they could separate the animal from the child. One handler held the lion's head while the other pulled its body back. Eventually, they managed to get the lion to release its grip, and the girl was finally freed, crying and in shock. Her mother immediately checked her for injuries. What happened next left many viewers confused. The mother suddenly laughed. Some believed it was a reaction to the intense stress, a confused emotional response after what had just happened. Others were unsettled by how casual everyone on set seemed afterward. One of the handlers leaned in to hug both the mother and child, and the lion, still present, was even shown on camera again, while the child's cries continued in the background. The show awkwardly continued with forced laughter and uneasy smiles. Years later, when the footage was uploaded to YouTube, viewers began to notice unsettling details. Before the lion lunged, it had been staring at the child for several moments, and at one point the camera zoomed in on its face as if capturing something that was about to unfold. Though the child wasn't seriously injured, specialists warned about the long-term emotional effects of such an event. Strangely, no legal action was ever taken. The lion remained with the handlers, and the child's identity was never revealed. She was never publicly seen again. It was February 14, 2018, and pre-dawn darkness over Atlanta was giving way to sunrise as the city prepared for Valentine's Day. Inside WSB-TV studios, the familiar energy of morning show preparation filled the air as the team readied for Atlanta Morning, the city's highest-rated news program. Michael Thompson arrived at 3:45 a.m., his usual time for script review before the 5 a.m. newscast. At 48, he'd become Atlanta's most trusted morning voice over 12 years, known for his warm personality and genuine connection with viewers. His salt-and-pepper hair and kind eyes had made him a father figure to many, earning numerous community service awards. For 3 weeks, Michael had been experiencing crushing headaches, the worst of his life. The pain started behind his left eye and radiated across his forehead, sometimes accompanied by dizziness he blamed on television stress. His family doctor prescribed stronger medication, but the headaches kept worsening. Co-anchor Jennifer Martinez had worked alongside Michael for 8 years. Their on-air chemistry was legendary, making Atlanta Morning feel like conversation between old friends. His wife Karen and 16-year-old daughter Emma watched every morning from home. Karen had grown concerned about the headaches and scheduled a neurologist appointment, but Michael insisted on maintaining his normal schedule. The Valentine's Day show featured romantic segments and live proposals. As 5 a.m. began, Michael's professionalism was evident as he welcomed viewers. He and Jennifer shared love stories and bantered about dinner plans, their easy rapport creating the comfortable atmosphere that made the show Atlanta's favorite morning routine. The first hour proceeded normally with news, weather, and Valentine's features. Michael interviewed a florist and participated in a cooking segment. His energy seemed typical, though Jennifer later recalled he was squinting more under studio lights. At 6:23 a.m., during a live interview with a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, Michael suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence. He'd been asking about their marriage secret when his words simply trailed off, leaving awkward silence. Jennifer thought he was pausing for effect, but his confused expression indicated something was wrong. Michael's left hand moved to his head as he struggled to form words, his articulate speech becoming slurred and incomprehensible. The elderly couple looked concerned as Michael swayed in his chair, his face turning pale and grayish. Jennifer tried covering, but it was clear something was terribly wrong. Without warning, Michael collapsed forward onto the news desk, his body going limp as he lost consciousness. The impact knocked over coffee cups and scattered papers, creating chaos broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers. Jennifer screamed his name while signaling for help, her professional composure cracking. Studio cameras remained focused as emergency medical technicians, coincidentally at the station for training, reached Michael within 90 seconds. His breathing was irregular, pupils dilated and unresponsive, classic signs of massive stroke. Viewers watched in horror as CPR was performed where moments before Michael had been sharing Valentine's joy. The station cut to commercial after 3 minutes of live emergency coverage. Social media exploded with concern as viewers shared shock at witnessing their trusted anchor fighting for his life on television. Michael was transported to Emory University Hospital, where doctors confirmed a massive hemorrhagic stroke from a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. Despite aggressive treatment, Michael was pronounced dead at 11:34 a.m. from severe brain hemorrhaging. The show went off air for the week as WSB-TV grieved their beloved colleague. Viewers flooded social media with tributes, remembering how Michael had brightened their mornings and connected them to their community. It was September 8, 2015, when 31-year-old traffic reporter Mara Jennings climbed into what would be her final helicopter ride. With 8 years of aerial broadcasting experience, Mara had become the calm voice that Los Angeles commuters relied on during their daily battles with gridlock. Known for her unflappable demeanor during chaotic traffic situations, she had earned respect throughout the industry for her professionalism and dedication to keeping drivers safe. That Tuesday morning promised to be particularly challenging for LA's notorious traffic patterns. A freeway construction project along one of the city's main interstate routes was causing unprecedented delays, backing up traffic for miles. Mara had specifically requested the early morning shift to provide comprehensive coverage of what transportation officials were calling the worst construction-related congestion in the city's history. The news helicopter lifted off from its downtown helipad As dawn broke over the sprawling metropolis, Mara settled into her familiar position, headset adjusted and notes organized, ready to guide millions of commuters through another day of urban navigation. What she didn't know was that her aircraft had been experiencing intermittent radio communication issues for 3 days, forcing her pilot to rely more heavily on visual navigation. As the helicopter climbed to its standard reporting altitude of 1,000 feet above the congested freeway corridor, air traffic control was noting an unusually busy morning in the skies. 5 news helicopters and 2 police aircraft were operating in the same general airspace, all drawn to cover the massive traffic disruption. The convergence of so many aircraft was creating a complex aerial dance that required precise coordination. The danger began building when a competing station's helicopter approached from the east, also seeking the best vantage point to cover the same massive traffic incident. Both aircraft were operating at similar altitudes, drawn to the most dramatic visual representation of the morning's transportation crisis. The pilots were experienced professionals, but the combination of heavy air traffic and compromised radio communications was creating a potentially deadly situation. As Mara continued her live broadcast, describing alternate routes and estimated delay times, her pilot initiated a banking turn to maintain safe separation from the approaching aircraft. Standard aviation protocols required clear radio coordination, yet Mara's helicopter's faulty transceiver caused heavy static, blocking an advisory warning about nearby aircraft convergence. The collision happened with terrifying suddenness. The tail rotor of the competing helicopter struck the main rotor assembly of Mara's aircraft, sending shards of rotor blades and fragments scattering through the air. Both helicopters immediately lost their ability to maintain controlled flight, entering rapid descents that would end in tragedy. Mara's helicopter, having lost its main rotor completely, fell approximately 1,100 feet in seconds. The aircraft struck the concrete freeway median at high speed, causing immediate structural collapse that killed both occupants instantly from massive impact trauma. The crash resulted in an immediate fuel fire that engulfed both aircraft wreckage. The same traffic jam that Mara had been reporting on became the backdrop for her final moments, as emergency responders struggled to reach the crash site through the very congestion she had dedicated her career to helping others navigate. It was August 29, 2017, in Gulf Shores, Alabama, as a slow-moving tropical system pushed severe weather onto the coast, while local stations remained live to cover deteriorating conditions. The storm had not yet reached hurricane strength, but sustained winds and frequent lightning had already prompted evacuation orders for beachfront areas earlier that afternoon. Most residents had cleared out, leaving empty hotels, closed shops, and darkened streets along the shoreline. Despite the warnings, one regional news station maintained a live coastal camera position to document the storm's early impact before conditions worsened. Marcus Thompson, 34, was the station's on-air meteorologist and had been assigned to the beach earlier in the day to provide updates on wind speed, surf conditions, and storm movement. He stood near a public access point where dunes offered partial wind cover, while his camera operator positioned equipment several yards away to keep the shot steady against gusts. The broadcast was carried live on the station's primary channel, with a fixed camera trained on Marcus as he delivered updates. Lightning activity had increased steadily throughout the afternoon, with frequent cloud-to-ground strikes occurring offshore and inland. Weather service alerts warned of elevated lightning risk even outside the main rain bands. As the report continued, Marcus explained that the storm's outer bands were producing unstable electrical conditions well ahead of the system's center. He gestured toward the darkened horizon while waves broke behind him and wind pushed rain across the lens. The camera operator remained just out of frame, monitoring audio levels and power connections. Several minutes into the live segment, a nearby lightning strike hit the sand roughly 50 yards from the camera position. The strike itself was not directly visible on screen, but a bright flash briefly overexposed the image. Almost immediately afterward, Marcus stiffened and collapsed backward onto the sand. The camera remained live as Marcus fell out of frame. Viewers saw the image shake slightly as the operator reacted, followed by shouting off camera. The broadcast cut abruptly to a studio graphic within seconds, leaving viewers with only the sudden disruption and loss of signal from the beach. Emergency services were alerted immediately, but storm conditions delayed access to the area. When responders reached the site, Marcus was unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined that Marcus had been killed by a lightning-related ground current. Investigators explained that while the bolt did not strike him directly, the electrical energy traveled through the wet sand and entered his body through contact points created by soaked clothing and bare skin. The sudden electrical surge caused immediate cardiac arrest. Review of the live broadcast confirmed that the fatal incident occurred while the camera was rolling. Though the lightning strike itself was not visible, the footage captured the exact moment Marcus collapsed, and the broadcast terminated unexpectedly. The station removed the clip from rebroadcast within hours. In the days that followed, the station suspended all on-location storm reporting from coastal zones. Internal safety reviews concluded that while the storm had not reached hurricane status, lightning conditions alone should have triggered a full pullback. Industry groups later referenced the incident when updating guidelines for live weather coverage, emphasizing that lightning risk often peaks before the most dramatic storm visuals arrive. It was November 26, 2015, and downtown streets buzzed with holiday energy as crowds gathered for the annual Thanksgiving parade. The morning air carried a crisp chill at 42 degrees, with overcast skies threatening light drizzle. Colorful banners stretched across intersections while vendors set up along the sidewalks, transforming the usual business district into a festive corridor. Nella Quirk, 29, had arrived early to secure her position for the live broadcast. A freelance traffic reporter working on a short-term contract, she possessed the determined energy of someone building her career one assignment at a time. Fresh from journalism school, Nella approached each opportunity with meticulous preparation and genuine enthusiasm for field reporting. Her colleagues knew her as reliable and eager to take on challenging assignments that others might avoid. The production crew had positioned her directly beneath a steel camera cable stretched across the street at approximately 14 feet high. The cable system allowed for sweeping overhead shots of the parade route, capturing the full spectacle of floats and marching bands. Nella stood centered under the span, facing the camera with the parade route behind her, ready to deliver traffic updates as the procession moved through downtown. Technical crews had installed the cable system the previous evening, tensioning it between two utility poles to support the overhead camera equipment. The steel cable showed signs of wear near one of the mounting clamps, with visible fraying where the metal strands had begun to separate under repeated stress. Despite the obvious deterioration, no exclusion zone had been established beneath the cable, and parade operations continued as scheduled. As floats began moving down the street, Nella maintained her position for the live shot. The mounting clamp, weakened by the cable's fraying and sustained tension, reached its failure point without warning. The steel cable failed suddenly, sending the suspended camera rig swinging downward on its safety line. The heavy camera housing struck Nella across the shoulder and head, knocking her violently sideways into the path of a slowly advancing parade float. The impact sent her stumbling directly into the float's front wheel assembly. She fell beneath the vehicle's undercarriage, and despite the driver's immediate attempt to brake, the massive structure rolled over her torso. The weight of the multi-ton float caused catastrophic chest and abdominal injuries. Nella lay motionless on the street as parade personnel rushed to halt the procession, the overhead broadcast camera still transmitting the moment she was struck and pulled beneath the float. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but the crushing trauma had caused irreversible internal injuries and massive hemorrhaging. Medical personnel confirmed death at the scene, attributed to multiple blunt force trauma and internal bleeding. The live broadcast feed continued for nearly 40 seconds before the control room abruptly cut back to the studio. Investigators later determined that the cable clamp had been improperly maintained by local technical operators. The frayed cable should have been replaced before the event, and safety protocols required establishing a clear zone beneath overhead equipment. The parade coverage ended abruptly, and subsequent safety reviews led to stricter equipment inspection requirements and mandatory clearance zones for future events. The incident prompted stricter standards for overhead rigging maintenance and mandatory safety clearance zones during live outdoor broadcasts. The network later settled with Nella's family, and city officials introduced new inspection requirements for all elevated technical installations used in public events. It was December 14, 2017, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A live early morning television segment was underway in the outdoor lot of a regional news station, where a winter survival demonstration had been set up for continuous broadcast coverage. Portable shelters, heaters, and weather instruments were arranged behind the presenter to compare different cold weather protection methods under real conditions. Air temperature measured -18 degrees Fahrenheit, with sustained wind producing wind chills near -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Jennifer Walsh, 32, was a field reporter assigned to the station's public safety and weather features. She had several years of experience reporting in severe winter conditions and had completed certified cold weather safety training courses. Producers approved the segment as an educational demonstration, showing how layering systems, wind barriers, and emergency shelters function in extreme cold. The original safety plan called for rotating on-air exposure in short intervals, with scheduled warm-up breaks inside a heated vehicle between segments. Pre-show planning notes outlined strict limits, no more than 15 minutes of continuous exposure per cycle, and mandatory medical check-ins after each return indoors. However, the live format combined multiple scheduled hits into a single extended block, due to programming delays earlier that morning. Instead of rotating out, Jennifer remained outside to maintain visual continuity, while the cameraman and audio technician rotated through warming periods. On-site medics monitored from a nearby vehicle and tracked visible indicators rather than continuous core temperature readings. The demonstration began shortly after 6 a.m., with Jennifer wearing insulated boots, layered thermal clothing, and a wind-resistant outer shell. She first showed how different glove types affected dexterity, then compared open exposure versus standing behind a portable windscreen. During the second hour, light snow began blowing across the lot, and wind gusts increased. Review findings later noted that her outer shell zipper had been partially open at the collar to accommodate a microphone cable, allowing repeated wind entry at the neck seal. Perspiration from repeated movement between props also dampened her inner base layer, reducing insulation efficiency. As exposure time accumulated beyond the original rotation limits, Jennifer's movements slowed and her hand coordination worsened. According to the medic log, she missed 2 scheduled warm-up breaks while continuing demonstrations of emergency blanket use and vehicle kits. Early hypothermia signs, reduced dexterity, and delayed responses were interpreted by crew as normal cold reaction for the segment's purpose. The live camera feed showed increasing speech slurring and shortened step length as she transitioned between stations. Near the end of the third hour on air, she attempted to reposition a wind barrier and stumbled. The live broadcast camera captured her losing balance and collapsing onto the packed snow surface. The control room immediately cut back to the studio, while field staff and medics reached her within moments. Passive and active rewarming measures were started on site, followed by rapid transport to a hospital. Walsh was pronounced dead later that day. The medical report listed severe accidental hypothermia with cardiac arrhythmia as the cause of death. The station's incident review concluded that extended continuous exposure beyond the planned rotation limits, wind intrusion at the collar opening, and moisture-degraded base layers combined to accelerate heat loss. Updated field broadcast protocols afterward required enforced exposure timers, mandatory rotation regardless of live scheduling changes, and continuous temperature monitoring for extreme cold demonstrations. It was October 13, 2008, in Santo André, São Paulo, Brazil, and 15-year-old Eloa Cristina Pimentel was at home working on a school project with her friend Nayara Rodriguez da Silva and 2 male classmates. The afternoon study session was meant to be routine preparation for upcoming exams, with textbooks and notebooks scattered across the small apartment's dining table. Eloa was a bright student with dreams of becoming a teacher. Her warm smile and infectious laughter making her popular among her peers at the local high school. The cramped apartment on Rua Antonio Cardoso had become Eloa's sanctuary after her family moved there 3 years earlier. Her mother worked double shifts at a local textile factory to support them, often leaving Eloa to care for her younger siblings while maintaining excellent grades. Despite the financial struggles, Eloa remained optimistic about her future, spending hours tutoring younger students and volunteering at the neighborhood community center. Her teachers consistently praised her maturity and dedication, seeing in her the potential to break the cycle of poverty that trapped so many in their working-class neighborhood. The relationship with Lindenberg had begun when Eloa was just 11 years old, an age gap that should have raised immediate concerns among adults in their community. What started as innocent childhood affection had gradually transformed into something darker as Lindenberg's possessive tendencies emerged. Friends and family members later recalled how he would become jealous when Eloa spoke to other boys, monitoring her activities and demanding to know her whereabouts at all times. When Eloa finally found the courage to end the relationship at age 13, Lindenberg's behavior became increasingly erratic and threatening. But that afternoon, their quiet study session took a dark turn when Eloa's 22-year-old ex-boyfriend, Lindenberg Fernandez Alves, suddenly entered the apartment with a firearm. The relationship had ended 2 years earlier when Eloa was just 13, but Lindenberg had never accepted the breakup. Reports later revealed he had become obsessed with her, unable to move on from their teenage romance that had grown increasingly possessive and unhealthy. Lindenberg let the two boys leave but kept Eloa and Nayara inside, starting a hostage situation that would last 5 days and be broadcast across Brazil. Police quickly responded, with the Special Tactical Actions Group, known as GATE, taking over and beginning negotiations, hoping to resolve the situation peacefully. The next evening, Nayara was released unharmed, but 2 days later, police made a surprising and dangerous move. They asked the 15-year-old to go back into the apartment, saying her presence might help calm Lindenberg. As the situation dragged on, media attention exploded. News outlets provided live updates day and night, and the case became a national obsession. Things went even further when Rede TV journalist Sonia Abro called Lindenberg live on air while he was still inside with the girls. She spoke with both him and Eloa, and the call was broadcast to the whole country. Legal experts later said the call interfered with the police operation, with a civil case filed against Abro, accusing her of putting lives at risk. By October 17th, the standoff had gone on for over 100 hours. Police said they heard gunshots and decided to break in. GATE, along with military police shock troops, forced their way inside. Lindenberg resisted, and during the struggle he used the firearm. Nayara was injured in the face but managed to leave the apartment alive. Eloa was hit twice, once in the head and once in the lower body. Cameras were rolling as she was carried out unconscious and taken to a hospital, but she didn't survive. On October 18th, doctors declared her brain dead at 11:30 p.m., and she was removed from life support. Her organs were later donated and saved 7 lives. Around 10,000 people attended Eloa's funeral. Nayara survived and went through a long recovery, and in 2018, she was awarded 150,000 Brazilian reais in damages after the court found the state responsible for what she had gone through. Lindenberg was sentenced to 39 years and 3 months in prison, and to this day, Eloa's story remains one of Brazil's most disturbing and tragic cases. It was September 12, 2016, and afternoon sun streamed through Television City's skylights as Studio 33 buzzed with excitement before another $1 Million Mind taping. The iconic game show set gleamed under bright lights, its familiar blue and gold creating an atmosphere of pure possibility. 200 guests filled tiered seating, energy crackling as they prepared to witness someone potentially win life-changing money. Robert Chen adjusted his tie nervously in the green room, reviewing notes one final time. At 45, the high school math teacher from Riverside had dreamed of this moment since watching as a teenager with his parents. His encyclopedic knowledge made him legendary at Roosevelt High School, where he'd taught 18 years. Colleagues joked Robert knew something about everything, the faculty's go-to guy for trivia nights and academic competitions. 3 years of applications, phone interviews, and auditions had led here. His wife, Linda, and twin 16-year-old daughters, Amy and Jessica, sat front row, wearing matching Team Chen t-shirts. They'd driven from Riverside that morning, barely containing excitement watching Robert's lifelong dream unfold. Robert's preparation had been methodical. He'd studied encyclopedias, memorized historical dates, practiced with online quiz games for months. His students helped create practice questions during lunch breaks, turning his classroom into an impromptu game show set. The principal granted him a personal day, and fellow teachers pooled money for the lucky tie he wore. Host Michael Sterling had been impressed by Robert's calm demeanor and quick thinking through earlier rounds. The teacher had methodically worked through increasingly difficult questions, using lifelines strategically. By reaching the final question, Robert had already won $500,000, more money than he ever imagined. The million-dollar question appeared as dramatic music filled the studio. In 1969, which Apollo mission first successfully landed humans on the moon? Multiple choice options displayed. A. Apollo 10, B. Apollo 11, C. Apollo 12, D. Apollo 13. For a man who'd taught space exploration to countless students, this should have been cake. Robert smiled confidently, his mind immediately recalling countless lessons about the historic moon landing. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, names as familiar as family. He'd used this exact question in classroom quizzes, knowing without doubt Apollo 11 was correct. As Robert opened his mouth to give his final answer, he suddenly pressed his right hand against his chest, face contorting in obvious pain. The studio audience watched confused as the confident teacher doubled over, breathing becoming labored. Michael Sterling initially thought nerves, the million-dollar moment overwhelming even prepared contestants. "You all right, Robert?" Michael asked, stepping closer with genuine concern. Robert tried speaking but managed only a weak nod as sweat beaded his forehead despite air conditioning. Chest pain intensified rapidly, radiating down his left arm in classic heart attack fashion. Robert's legs gave out as he collapsed against the podium, sliding to the studio floor as his family screamed. The show's medical team rushed onto set as cameras kept rolling. Linda Chen pushed past security, reaching her husband's side as paramedics began emergency treatment on the game show stage. The audience watched in stunned silence as CPR was performed, where moments before a man had been on the verge of winning $1 million. Robert's daughters cried uncontrollably as medical personnel worked frantically, celebration replaced by desperate urgency. Despite 20 minutes of aggressive resuscitation, Robert Chen was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai at 4:47 p.m. from massive heart attack. The episode never aired, but 200 witnesses were forever changed by watching a man's final moments during what should have been his greatest triumph. It was July 23, 2016, when 29-year-old meteorologist Paige Donovan made a decision that would cost her everything. Known throughout the weather station as fearless and ambitious, Paige had built her reputation over 6 years by going where other forecasters wouldn't dare. Her colleagues often joked that she chased storms like others chased dreams, but on this sweltering Arizona evening, that fearlessness would prove fatal. For 3 days, Paige had been tracking what she believed would be the summer's most significant thunderstorm system, approaching Phoenix. The massive cell promised to deliver the kind of dramatic footage that separated good meteorologists from great ones. While her competitors played it safe with indoor coverage, Paige saw opportunity in the approaching danger. The weather station's observation deck had been her target location all afternoon. Despite her producer's initial refusal, Paige's persuasive arguments about capturing competitor-beating footage eventually won approval. The covered deck, surrounded by metal railings and equipment housing, offered the perfect vantage point to showcase the storm's raw power. Perched on the 10th floor of the downtown broadcast tower, it gave Paige an unobstructed view of the city skyline and a dangerously exposed position once the storm drew closer. What nobody realized was that the building's grounding system, installed decades earlier, no longer met modern safety standards. As evening approached, Paige positioned herself on the deck with her camera operator. The storm system, initially 8 miles away, began moving faster than meteorological models had predicted. Lightning flickered in the distance like nature's own strobe lights, each flash bringing the danger closer to the downtown station. Then everything changed in an instant. A lightning bolt struck the building's antenna array with devastating force. The inadequate grounding system failed catastrophically. Instead of safely directing the electricity into the ground, the current found alternative pathways through the metal infrastructure surrounding Page's position. Although the building's surge protection system had been installed years earlier, its corroded grounding cables couldn't safely channel the lightning's residual current, allowing electricity to arc unpredictably through the structure. The electrical surge traveled through the metal railings and equipment housing, creating a deadly electrical field across the observation deck. Page, standing near the metal railing while gesturing toward the approaching storm, became an unwitting conductor in nature's most violent electrical display. The moment her hands contacted the electrified railing, a residual current estimated at around 7,000 volts coursed through her body, energy redirected through the metal structure rather than from the lightning's full charge. The electricity entered through her hands and exited through her feet, following the path of least resistance through her vital organs. Her heart couldn't withstand the surge and stopped beating immediately. The electrical shock caused instant cardiac arrest and respiratory paralysis, effects typical in lightning electrocution. Page collapsed unconsciously within seconds, severe electrical burns marking the entry and exit points where the current had traveled. The same electrical surge that killed her also damaged the camera equipment, cutting the live broadcast feed and leaving viewers staring at static screens. The surge also overwhelmed the studio's surge protectors, frying the transmission relays that linked the broadcast tower to the studio feed. Emergency responders reached the weather station within minutes. They found Page in full cardiac arrest, her body bearing the telltale signs of electrical trauma. Despite immediate CPR and advanced life support measures, her heart had sustained irreversible electrical damage. At the Regional Trauma Center, medical teams fought desperately to restart her heart, but the electrical injury had been too severe. The same lightning that Page had spent her career studying had ultimately claimed her life through a tragic combination of aging infrastructure and split-second timing. It was January 15, 2014, in Oklahoma City, as an ice storm crippled infrastructure across the city and forced local television stations to remain live under worsening conditions. By late afternoon, the station's building was running on partial backup power. Overnight freezing rain had caused repeated outages, and engineers had rerouted electricity to keep the newsroom operational. Portable heaters were placed beneath desks to offset the failed HVAC system, and extension strips were added to accommodate increased electrical load. The setup was temporary, rushed, and never intended for sustained live broadcasting. Patricia Rodriguez, 41, had been on air for hours anchoring storm coverage. She remained seated at the main desk as field reports cycled in, updating viewers on road closures and rolling blackouts. The desk housed metal framing beneath its laminate surface, with wiring for lighting, audio interfaces, and monitors bundled together underneath. Earlier in the day, a small number of staff reported faint tingling sensations when touching metal surfaces, but with only a skeleton engineering crew available and storm coverage ongoing, the reports were attributed to static buildup and not escalated. As temperatures hovered around 8 degrees, moisture entered the building from a leaking internal pipe stressed by the cold, seeping into electrical pathways beneath the studio floor. Electrical logs later showed grounding irregularities forming gradually, not suddenly. Voltage fluctuations increased as heaters cycled on and off beneath the desk, drawing power from the same circuit as broadcast equipment. During the live evening segment, Patricia adjusted her posture repeatedly, shifting her arms and briefly rubbing her forearm against the edge of the desk. Viewers noticed her pause once to steady herself, though the broadcast continued uninterrupted. Behind the scenes, technicians later admitted they were monitoring power levels, but believed the system would hold through the hour. At approximately 6:42 p.m., while delivering a weather update, Patricia leaned forward, her left forearm pressing against the desk edge as her foot made contact with the metal base of her chair. In that moment, a surge passed through the compromised circuit. The metal frame beneath the desk had become energized at household voltage, creating a direct contact point. On live television, Patricia visibly stiffened, Her speech stopped mid-word. She attempted to pull back, but instead slumped forward, collapsing against the desk. The camera remained on the wide studio shot as confusion erupted off-screen. The co-anchor stood and moved toward her as the control room scrambled to cut away. Viewers saw the collapse in real time before the feed switched abruptly to pre-recorded programming. The station did not immediately explain the interruption, but emergency services were already en route. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes and found Patricia unresponsive. Cardiac arrest had already occurred. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where resuscitation efforts failed. The medical examiner later ruled her death accidental, caused by cardiac arrhythmia, triggered by electrical shock. Investigators documented contact burns on her forearm and confirmed the desk's metal frame had been energized due to grounding failure, combined with overload from auxiliary heating equipment. Because the collapse occurred on a live broadcast, recordings circulated briefly online before being removed. The footage showed the precise moment Patricia lost motor control, making it one of the rare fatal workplace accidents partially witnessed by a live television audience. The station was shut down for inspection. Regulators cited multiple electrical violations, including improper use of heaters, compromised grounding, and failure to suspend operations despite escalating risk. Patricia Rodriguez's death became a case study in broadcast safety training, demonstrating how layered, ignored hazards can converge on live television, with fatal consequences witnessed in real time. It was September 9th, 2018, when the Outdoor Food Festival in southwestern Arizona was reaching its peak afternoon energy. The desert sun blazed overhead at 102 degrees, casting harsh shadows across the vendor booths and performance stages scattered throughout the dusty fairgrounds. Local television crews had set up equipment near the main cooking demonstration area, where the smell of grilled meats and spiced vegetables mixed with the dry desert air. Teague Mull was 41 years old and had spent most of his adult life working temporary food stalls across desert fairs and weekend festivals. After leaving a warehouse job a decade earlier, he built his small business around portable propane burners and simple street dishes, often repairing and reusing his own equipment to keep costs low. Friends knew him as careful and routine-driven, someone who trusted the same worn tools he had relied on for years. That morning, Teague had been invited to participate in a live cooking segment for a local television station. The opportunity represented a significant boost for his small business. He arrived early to set up his portable cooking station, which consisted of a folding table, a high-output propane burner, and the necessary gas connections. The propane system had been assembled quickly using equipment that had seen extensive use. The rubber hose connecting the tank to the burner showed signs of wear, with small cracks visible along its length. The regulator had been swapped out from another setup without proper testing. As the afternoon segment began, Teague positioned himself behind the cooking table with the propane tank beneath the work surface. The camera operator focused on the demonstration while festival attendees gathered around. A faint odor of gas lingered near the burner, masked by the food aromas throughout the festival grounds. The propane had been leaking slowly from the damaged hose connection, collecting briefly beneath the table before warm air currents and foot traffic dispersed it into the open air. The leak remained undetected as Teague prepared his ingredients and explained his cooking process. When Teague reached for the burner's ignition switch, the escaping propane ignited immediately. The flame spread rapidly back to the damaged hose. Within seconds, the weakened hose ruptured completely, creating a continuous torch of burning propane that sprayed upward across the cooking station. The sustained jet of flame engulfed Teague's torso, arms, and face as his clothing ignited instantly. The ruptured hose sprayed burning propane across the cooking station, forcing him to stagger backward in panic. He collapsed onto the stage platform and stopped moving as the fire continued feeding from the open line. Festival staff rushed forward with fire extinguishers, but several seconds passed before they could shut off the gas at the tank valve. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and found Teague unresponsive with no detectable pulse. Resuscitation efforts continued on the stage as crews shut down the burning equipment. Teague was pronounced dead at the scene from catastrophic thermal burns and inhalation of superheated gases. The investigation later confirmed that a cracked propane hose caused the leak and rupture. Festival officials suspended all live cooking demonstrations and introduced mandatory equipment inspections. The live broadcast captured the ignition, the burst of flame, and Teague's collapse before the control room cut the feed. Later that evening, the station confirmed on air that the vendor had died at the scene, closing one of the few broadcasts in which a fatal accident was witnessed live. It was May 8, 2014, in Birmingham, Alabama. A live morning weather segment was underway in the parking lot of a regional news station as a supercell storm system approached the metro area. Broadcast vans were staged near the building, with a fixed camera and weather instruments set up to show real-time conditions as the storm advanced toward the city. David Chen, 51, was the station's chief meteorologist and had worked in on-air forecasting for more than 20 years. He was known locally for field demonstrations during severe weather, occasionally stepping outside the studio to show wind, rainfall, or hail intensity firsthand. His reporting style focused on practical safety guidance and visual examples, rather than studio graphics alone. In the days leading up to the broadcast, forecast models showed a volatile system capable of producing large hail and strong downdrafts, though early projections placed the most intense core slightly north of the station's location. Station planning notes showed the live segment was approved with safeguards. A news vehicle was positioned within a short sprint distance, and David wore a hard helmet with a clear face shield typically used for small hail and debris. The camera operator was placed behind a low concrete wall near the building entrance, using a zoom lens to maintain distance. The plan called for the segment to end once hail size exceeded safe demonstration limits, at which point the crew would move indoors and continue coverage from radar feeds. The live shot began shortly after 6:15 a.m. Light rain and small hail started within minutes, visibly bouncing off the asphalt. David demonstrated hail size comparisons using marked reference cards and advised viewers to avoid windows and seek solid cover. Wind speed increased rapidly as the storm cell shifted track. Radar updates relayed to the control room showed the high-intensity core trending closer than earlier projections indicated. Hail size increased from marble to golf ball diameter in less than 2 minutes. Impacts became loud enough to register clearly on the broadcast microphones. David moved toward the news van as planned, using it as partial cover while continuing to speak to camera. As he reached the vehicle, a cluster of larger hailstones struck the windshield and hood almost simultaneously. One impact fractured the outer layer of the windshield glass, sending a burst of laminated shards inward through the already lowered side window opening used for cable routing. David recoiled and lost footing on the accumulating hailstones underfoot. He fell backward onto the pavement, striking the rear of his head against the curb edge beside the parking divider. The camera, still live, captured the fall from a distance as the operator took cover from the intensifying impacts. The segment audio recorded the control room calling for an immediate cut as the signal switched back to studio radar. Crew members reached David within seconds, once the largest hail burst past. On-site staff initiated first aid, while emergency services, already on severe weather standby, were dispatched to the station. He was transported to a nearby hospital with severe head trauma and skull fracture. He did not regain consciousness and was pronounced dead later that morning. The incident review concluded that the fatal injury resulted from secondary impact trauma during rapid hail escalation, not direct hailstone penetration. The station updated its field demonstration policy to prohibit outdoor live shots once hail exceeded preset size thresholds, and required all severe weather segments to maintain fully enclosed shelter positions. It was October 14, 2017, when 28-year-old sports reporter Damon Ellis arrived at what would become his final assignment. With 5 years of experience covering college athletics, Damon had built a reputation as an energetic journalist who brought genuine enthusiasm to every game he covered. His colleagues knew him as someone who always went the extra mile to capture the perfect shot. But on this homecoming Saturday in Texas, that dedication would prove fatal. The assignment was covering the homecoming game between two fierce rival universities. The atmosphere was electric, with alumni returning to campus and students preparing for what promised to be one of the most exciting games of the season. Damon had specifically requested this assignment because of his expertise in college sports and his ability to capture the raw emotion that made these rivalries compelling. Arriving 3 hours before kickoff, Damon was determined to create comprehensive coverage that would showcase the entire homecoming experience. He had convinced his producer to let him broadcast from a temporary platform erected in the stadium's upper deck, arguing that the elevated position would provide spectacular crowd shots and give viewers a unique perspective. The stadium was a 40-year-old concrete structure that had hosted countless games over the decades. While maintenance crews had noted some structural concerns with the upper deck during routine inspections, the facility had been cleared for normal use. The temporary broadcast platform had been installed by a subcontractor using mounting points that appeared secure, but had not been properly load tested for the additional weight of broadcast equipment. The subcontractor had reused decades-old anchor bolts embedded in weathered concrete, unaware that years of corrosion had weakened their grip. The crowd's synchronized chants amplified the structural vibrations, matching the platform's natural frequency, a phenomenon engineers call resonance, which rapidly accelerated the loosening. As game time approached, the stadium began filling with an enthusiastic crowd that would eventually reach near capacity, with tens of thousands of spectators packing the stands. The energy was palpable as fans streamed into their seats wearing team colors. Damon positioned himself on the platform with his camera operator, excited about the dramatic footage they would capture. Damon began his live pre-game show, interviewing alumni and describing the incredible atmosphere building around him. His enthusiasm was infectious as he painted a picture of college football at its finest, with passionate fans creating an environment that epitomized amateur athletics. The mounting bolts had been installed to standard specifications, but the sustained crowd vibrations were producing stresses the setup was never meant to withstand. The rhythmic movement was gradually loosening the connections, creating a dangerous situation that nobody could detect. Damon noticed the platform beginning to sway slightly, but assumed it was normal movement from crowd activity. He had worked from temporary structures before and trusted that proper safety protocols had been followed. His focus remained on delivering compelling coverage, unaware that the platform's structural integrity was rapidly deteriorating. The failure happened without warning. The mounting bolts suddenly gave way completely, causing the entire platform to separate from its attachment points. Damon and 800 pounds of broadcast equipment began falling 85 feet toward the concrete concourse below. The fall lasted only 2.3 seconds. He struck the concrete surface with tremendous force, suffering immediate fatal head trauma and instant death. It was August 26, 2015, and morning mist clung to Smith Mountain Lake's shores as the sun crept over Virginia's tranquil waters. The Bridgewater Plaza shopping center stirred quietly to life, store owners preparing for another peaceful day, unaware their lakeside community would soon become ground zero for national tragedy. Allison Parker adjusted her earpiece in the WDBJ-TV news van, reviewing notes with the enthusiasm that had made her a viewer favorite in just 14 months at the Roanoke station. At 24, her infectious smile and natural presence promised a bright future in broadcast journalism. Her boyfriend, Chris Hurst, anchored the evening news at the same station, two young journalists building careers and dreams together. Adam Ward positioned his camera with the precision that made him WDBJ's most trusted photographer. At 27, 4 years of experience had earned him respect for technical expertise and compelling visuals under pressure. His fiancée, Melissa Ott, produced the morning show, their recent engagement celebrating love blooming in the newsroom. Adam's steady presence behind the lens made him Allison's preferred partner for important assignments. The morning interview featured Vicki Gardner, Executive Director of Smith Mountain Lake Regional Chamber of Commerce, discussing the area's 50th anniversary celebration. The live shot was scheduled for 6:45 a.m. during morning. Hosted by Kimberly McBroom and Leo Hirschkorn, Southwestern Virginia viewers had grown accustomed to starting days with WDBJ's trusted faces. Allison harbored anxiety about former colleague Vester Lee Flanagan, terminated 2 years earlier. Working under the name Bryce Williams, he'd filed EEOC complaints and made threatening statements about the station. Management had implemented security measures, but threats seemed to fade with time. As the live shot began, Allison's professionalism radiated through her characteristic warmth. Adam's flawless camera work captured the scenic lake backdrop and engaging conversation. Home viewers saw nothing unusual, just quality local journalism that had made WDBJ trusted for decades. At exactly 6:45:27 a.m. mid-interview, a figure approached from outside camera view. Flanagan had driven to the location, waiting for the perfect moment. Armed with a Glock 19, he positioned himself feet from the unsuspecting crew. The first shots rang out without warning, echoing across the quiet plaza as Allison screamed and tried to run. Adam's camera captured chaotic footage as he fled while clutching his equipment. The live feed showed terrifying glimpses before the camera crashed down, transmitting distorted concrete images. In the studio, Kimberly and Leo watched in horror as colleagues' screams filled the audio. The station cut to commercial immediately, but thousands had witnessed the attack in real time. Flanagan fired multiple close-range shots, striking both journalists before fleeing in his rental car. Vicky Gardner was wounded but survived. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but both WDBJ employees were pronounced dead at the scene. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds, its impact reverberating through journalism forever. The station struggled to continue broadcasting as news spread. Traumatized viewers flooded social media with shock and disbelief. The journalism community rallied around WDBJ, with stations nationwide paying tribute and discussing the unique dangers reporters face in the field. It was March 15, 2017, when 34-year-old field reporter Tristan Cole arrived at what would become his final assignment. With 11 years of experience covering local news and construction stories, Tristan had built a reputation as a thorough journalist who wasn't afraid to get close to the action. His colleagues respected his dedication to capturing the human side of every story, but on this windy morning, that commitment would prove fatal. The assignment seemed routine enough, covering the topping-out ceremony of a new residential building downtown. The 12-story apartment complex represented a significant addition to the neighborhood, and Tristan had specifically requested the story because of his experience in construction reporting. Before setting up, Tristan signed in at the site office, collected a visitor's badge, and was given a brief safety orientation, a routine step on any active construction site. He was required to wear a hard hat and reflective vest, though his camera operator noted Tristan tended to inch closer than most reporters would for a better shot. The construction site buzzed with activity as crews prepared for the ceremonial placement of the final beam. Tristan positioned himself strategically to get the best angles, despite safety personnel warning him about staying within designated areas. The veteran reporter had covered dozens of local construction projects and felt confident in his ability to judge safe distances from heavy machinery. What concerned the construction supervisors that morning were the unusual wind conditions. Gusts were reaching 35 miles per hour, pushing the limits of safe crane operation. However, with media present and schedules to maintain, the decision was made to proceed with the ceremony as planned. The tower crane, a 15-year-old workhorse that had passed its recent inspection, stood ready to hoist the final 2-ton steel beam, the ceremonial topping out piece into position. Under normal circumstances, crane operations are suspended when sustained winds exceed 30 miles per hour or gusts reach 40 miles per hour. The site's safety officer had mentioned it was near that threshold, but the presence of local officials and media created subtle pressure to move forward anyway. Unknown to anyone on site, maintenance logs had documented hydraulic fluid leaks in the boom assembly over the past month. Temporary repairs had been made, but full hydraulic replacements were deferred until project completion. The subcontracted maintenance team had documented the issue, but flagged it as non-critical, meaning repairs could wait as long as hydraulic pressure remained stable. With tight deadlines and penalty clauses looming, management chose to monitor the leak rather than halt operations. The combination of aging equipment, compromised hydraulics, and extreme weather conditions was creating a perfect storm of mechanical failure. Tristan began his live broadcast, interviewing the project foreman about construction milestones. The camera crew set up roughly 60 feet from the crane's base, outside the marked exclusion zone. But during live coverage, Tristan instinctively stepped forward to frame the crane better behind him, crossing into the restricted area by only a few meters. His enthusiasm was evident as he described the local development rising behind him, unaware that he was standing within the crane's potential fall radius. The ceremony commenced with the crane operator beginning the delicate process of lifting the steel beam. As the load rose toward the building's summit, a sudden wind gust of 42 miles per hour struck the extended boom. The additional lateral force, combined with the heavy load, created stresses that the compromised hydraulic system simply couldn't handle. The sudden gust introduced a side load the crane's jib wasn't designed to resist. The slewing ring, which allows the boom to rotate, seized under the strain. A moment later, the entire upper section sheared off its turntable connection, sending the boom and cab hurtling downward. Tristan heard the loud metallic grinding and looked up to see the steel structure plummeting directly toward his position. Despite his quick reflexes and attempt to run, the laws of physics were unforgiving. The boom struck him within 1.5 seconds, crushing him instantly against the concrete ground. The grinding sound lasted less than a heartbeat, just enough for Tristan to glance upward. Witnesses later recalled him starting to move before the steel blurred into his frame. At that height, the falling section hit the ground in under 2 seconds. The impact was so severe that death was instantaneous. The crushing trauma to his head, chest, and spine left no possibility of survival. Construction workers who witnessed the accident stood in shocked silence, unable to comprehend how quickly the routine ceremony had turned into tragedy. The live feed froze mid-sentence, leaving viewers staring at an empty frame before the broadcast abruptly cut to black. It was June 18, 2018 in Westfield, Massachusetts, as warm afternoon weather settled over the high school campus ahead of an outdoor graduation ceremony scheduled to begin shortly. Families arrived early, filling the main parking lot and nearby access roads. Folding chairs and blankets were carried toward a roped-off grassy area beside the lot where the stage had been set. Graduates gathered nearby in caps and gowns, forming loose lines as staff finalized seating arrangements. A local cable channel had already begun airing wide shots of the scene, following the flow of arrivals and preparations across the campus. The school's parking lot was built for daily use, not large public events. Temporary barriers and cones had been placed to guide vehicles away from pedestrian areas, but congestion built quickly as drivers searched for spaces. Several cars ended up partially blocking a painted fire lane that ran along the edge of the ceremony area. Rebecca Martinez, 48, the school's principal, had been moving between the parking lot and the stage, coordinating last-minute details with staff. When she noticed her own vehicle angled into the fire lane, she moved to address it before the ceremony began. An assistant offered to handle it, but Martinez chose to move the car herself. Her vehicle was parked tightly between others near the outer edge of the lot. Beyond the fire lane, the asphalt dropped into a grassy drainage slope used to manage runoff after heavy rain. Orange safety fencing marked the boundary between pavement and grass, but it was meant as a visual guide rather than a physical barrier. As preparations continued, cameras remained trained on the ceremony area, capturing families settling into seats and graduates adjusting gowns. In the background of the wide shot, vehicles were still maneuvering through the crowded lot. Martinez entered her car and began backing out carefully. As she turned the wheel to clear the adjacent vehicle, she mistakenly pressed the accelerator instead of the brake. The car surged backward, crossed the fire lane, and struck the temporary fencing. From the ongoing wide shot, sudden movement drew attention near the edge of the frame as the vehicle broke through the barrier and dropped several feet down the grassy embankment beyond the pavement. Several people in the seating area stood up at once, turning toward the lot as shouting spread through the crowd. Graduates nearest the stage froze in place while staff began running toward the slope. The scene remained visible as the atmosphere shifted from anticipation to confusion. Chairs were abandoned, and movement rippled across the field as people tried to understand what had happened just beyond view. Witnesses later said the car descended the embankment at speed before coming to rest at the bottom. Parents and staff reached the vehicle within seconds. Emergency responders who had been assigned to the event arrived quickly and began medical intervention before transporting Martinez to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled her death accidental, citing catastrophic injuries sustained during the crash. Investigators determined that pedal misapplication, combined with the sloped terrain beyond the parking lot, caused the loss of control. The temporary fencing was found to be incapable of stopping a vehicle. The graduation ceremony was postponed. In the days that followed, the district reviewed traffic flow and safety planning for large events, focusing on vehicle placement and barrier use near pedestrian areas. It was October 28, 2016, at a mid-sized college football stadium in the Midwest. The autumn air carried a crisp 52-degree chill as thousands of fans filled the concrete stands under overcast skies. The facility buzzed with the energy of homecoming weekend, its artificial turf gleaming under the stadium lights that had just flickered on against the darkening evening. 22-year-old Zora worked part-time in stadium operations while pursuing her communications degree. Known for her reliability and quick thinking, she had been handling game day logistics for 2 seasons. Her supervisor described her as someone who never hesitated to jump in when needed, always maintaining a calm demeanor even during the chaos of major sporting events. That evening, Zora was assigned to the utility crew, responsible for transporting supplies and equipment during game breaks. The stadium employed a sophisticated cable camera system that ran on tensioned wires stretched diagonally across the field, allowing for dynamic aerial shots during broadcasts. The system operated at high speeds, with cameras that could accelerate rapidly between predetermined positions. During the third quarter timeout, Zora received instructions to deliver water bottles to the visiting team's sideline. The break in play typically lasted 3 minutes, providing a narrow window for field access. Stadium protocol required coordination between broadcast operations and field personnel, but the communication system relied heavily on visual cues and radio chatter. As Zora stepped onto the field carrying the supply crate, the cable camera system initiated a rapid transition sequence. The camera carriage, weighing approximately 15 pounds and traveling at an estimated 25 miles per hour, moved along its predetermined path. The tensioned cable, positioned roughly 12 feet above the turf at its lowest point, was designed to remain clear of normal field activity. The collision occurred near the 35-yard line. The high-speed camera carriage struck Zora across the upper body with tremendous force, knocking her violently backward onto the artificial turf. She hit the ground hard, lying motionless as the moving carriage dragged past her before the operator triggered an emergency stop and the system ground to a halt. The impact left her unconscious and unresponsive on the turf, with visible head and neck injuries. Players from both teams immediately signaled for medical attention, as the live broadcast briefly captured the moment she was struck and collapsed before the feed quickly cut away and stadium personnel rushed to the scene. Emergency medical technicians reached her within 90 seconds, finding her unconscious and barely breathing. They began life support and transported her to the regional trauma center within 12 minutes. The game was suspended as investigators documented the scene. The cable camera system was immediately shut down and secured as evidence. Despite aggressive intervention, Zora never regained consciousness. She was pronounced dead at the hospital 4 hours after the incident from complications of severe spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury. The investigation concluded that the incident resulted from a breakdown in communication protocols between broadcast operations and field management. No comprehensive field clearance procedure existed for coordinating cable camera movements with personnel access. The tensioned cable system, while properly maintained and functioning as designed, operated without adequate safety measures. The stadium implemented new safety protocols requiring complete camera system shutdown during any field access and installed additional communication equipment. The investigation found no mechanical malfunction, determining that the tragedy stemmed from procedural gaps in managing the intersection of broadcast technology and human activity in the live sports environment. It was May 22, 2018, in the Phoenix metro area. A live evening broadcast was underway inside a small community college television studio. where a student-produced talk show focused on local civic issues and investigative reporting. The set was built in a converted media classroom with fixed cameras, overhead lights, and a live switcher feeding directly to a regional cable access channel. The episode's featured guest was an independent journalist scheduled to discuss a recent investigation into municipal contracting irregularities. Sarah Kim, 28, worked as a freelance investigative reporter covering local procurement and zoning disputes. Over 5 years, she had published several documented reports involving bid favoritism and shell subcontractors tied to mid-level officials and private developers. Her work had drawn legal threats and hostile messages, but no confirmed direct attacks. The live studio appearance was arranged to summarize her findings and explain how public records requests were used in her reporting process. Production notes described the episode as higher interest than usual, but not classified as high security risk. The studio operated with a small crew of students and one faculty supervisor. Standard procedure required exterior doors to remain locked during live broadcasts, with entry routed through a monitored front desk. A secondary side corridor door near the studio was normally alarmed, but had been set to maintenance mode earlier that afternoon for equipment deliveries, and the door was physically wedged open for repeated load-in trips. The alert had not been rearmed before airtime. Interior hallway cameras were present, but not actively monitored during the show because the control station was focused on switching the live program feed. The interview began shortly after 7:30 p.m. and proceeded normally through the first segment. Sarah discussed document trails, contract layering, and oversight gaps, while the host reviewed graphics prepared by the student staff. Approximately 20 minutes into the live broadcast, a man entered through the side corridor door and walked toward the studio floor. Video later reviewed from the hallway camera showed he wore a delivery vest and carried a small tool bag, which matched the type commonly seen during earlier equipment drop-offs that day. The individual stepped onto the set edge within camera frame while the segment was still live. Crew members initially interpreted the approach as a late technical adjustment because maintenance staff had moved through the area earlier. The man closed distance to the guest position and produced a concealed handgun at close range. The live camera feed captured the immediate confrontation and Sarah's collapse after a single shot. The director cut to a standby graphic within seconds, as audio was muted and the studio feed was terminated. Campus security and city police units arrived within minutes and secured the building. Paramedics confirmed Sarah Kim was dead at the scene from a gunshot wound. The suspect, later identified as Daniel Ruiz, 41, was located that night during a traffic stop and taken into custody without further incident. Court records show he was charged with first-degree murder and illegal firearm possession, later convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Investigators found no organized crime links and concluded the motive was a personal grievance tied to a company named in one of Kim's published investigations. The official review cited multiple security failures, including a disabled side door alarm and no dedicated access monitor during the live broadcast. Updated campus broadcast rules later required verified alarm status, controlled entry staffing, and a designated floor safety marshal for all live shows. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.